You're live. I'm live. Okay, welcome. There's one person out there. That's good. Welcome, everyone, both out there and here in the room, to Discovering Buddhism. This is our second class on Samsara and Nirvana. I'm Alan. So we've got quite a bit to get through on the second noble truth really tonight. But as usual, let's start with our 5 minutes breathing meditation to get comfortable and settle the mind after the day's busy activities. Okay, so now just coming into our inner world. Getting a comfortable position, the floor, the chair, lying down, sitting up. Using the breath as our object to focus on. First of all, just a moment to reflect on our good fortune to be able to do some practice together, study the Dharma. And letting go of the busy day we've had. Coming into the body, checking our posture, relaxing the shoulders, feeling the body resting on the surface. With each out breath, feel we're letting go physically, all the holding on. Mentally, we're letting go of the conceptual thoughts, busy mind. Time to give our mind a break. Take care of the mind. And then giving more attention to the breath, entering, leaving the body. Natural rhythm of the breath. Nothing to control. Just watching the breath. Staying with the breath. Just checking whether on the breath from time to time. When the mind wanders, gently let go of that thought, that distraction. Patiently come back to the breath. Home to the breath. just relax. Okay, so just the handouts. First, there's the notes that I sent out yesterday for tonight, and I also sent out an introduction to the whole DB course, Discovering Buddhism course, which I only just recently rediscovered. Going through all the materials and noticed this introduction for students, particularly good for people who've just started. Just tells you all the topics and what the aim of the course is and so on. So if anyone who happens to look either tonight or when they look later, if they want to join the group and get all the material, if you just put your email address up on the live chat, your name and email address, and I'll just put you on the email list and each week send you the notes. So that's one way of joining the group. Otherwise, just come to the class live, and then I'll get your email address and put you on the list. And anyone who doesn't want to be on the list anymore, just let me know too. I'll take you off. Okay. So I've got 3 quite easy questions just to review what we did last week, just to kind of refresh our minds. These are, first one, the Four Noble Truths. So basically, the Samsara and Nirvana module is really looking at the Four Noble Truths, the first teachings that the Buddha gave in Sarnath, which is in northern India. So anyone here remember the name of the Four Noble Truths?
Suffering exists.
Yep, the truth of suffering. Suffering exists.
That suffering exists because of causes.
Right. There are true causes, I often call that, yeah.
That you can end suffering.
True cessations, true ends of sufferings, yeah.
And then you can follow the path to Nirvana.
Yeah, the path is the way, really, to the end of suffering.
Yeah.
So that's true. There's many different ways they abbreviate true sufferings, true causes, true cessations, and true path. Yeah. So just I got these questions from the list they give with the materials, and they also, the second one actually came with the first. Why do we start with suffering as the first noble truth? Does anyone know why we always? Yeah.
Is it because Buddha was originally a man, and we can also relate and follow the path? Right.
Basically, it's just people at home probably can't hear. But Julia just said if they wouldn't hear in this repeat anyway. Because Buddha was trying to relate to people as human beings, the common situation where everybody suffers. Nobody wants to, but we all experience suffering. So until we acknowledge that we have not just the obvious sufferings, but the different types, the really subtle types included, then we won't really know that there's a problem. If there's no problem, we don't go to the doctor to have the problem fixed. We don't get the medicine. So even though the medicine is the last noble truth, the path, to get to the doctor and get the medicine, we've got to actually realise we're sick. Okay, so that's why the Buddha taught those 3 types of suffering, which we will do as a meditation at the end of the class. So what are those 3 types of suffering? Did everyone remember from last week? 3 types?
Suffering and suffering.
Yep. Suffering of suffering, number one.
Suffering of change.
Suffering of change.
And all pervasive suffering.
Or phasing out. I noticed His Holiness calls that conditional suffering, conditional suffering. So different teachers have different terminology.
Can I just ask you with the last one? I know the first one is, is suffering of suffering. You're sick, you hurt yourself, whatever.
Yeah.
And then the change could be you've got a new job or constant changes in your life. But all pervasive suffering, is that more that we don't even know that we're suffering?
That's right.
That, we do things in our life like I bought a phone and then I'm happy with that, but then I see that it's 10% off somewhere else, and you know what I mean? That constant, endless stuff that goes on.
Okay.
And not even happy with our own existence.
Just by being alive, we're being in this circle, the mortal coil, as we call it. We're going to suffer. The first one, they often, in one of the answer guides I looked at, they use the idea of a burnt finger. So the first one is the actual pain of the burnt finger. It's physical, but the first one, suffering of suffering, includes mental as well, like depression, anxiety, and stress. So it's both physical and mental, day-to-day suffering that we all feel. It's obvious. We don't usually have to teach that exists, because everybody can relate to it. The second one is suffering of change. So with the burnt finger, it's when you put the cream on and it actually takes the pain away, like a local anaesthetic. And it may not even take it away, but it just reduces it. So because it's less, it's better than it was. It can feel as though it's pleasure. So it's a bit like when you're really hot at the beach and you go in the water, it actually feels completely beautiful, like pleasure. But if you actually stay in the water, you can eventually get really cold. So this suffering of change. So it covers all things that we usually take for pleasure. The delicious meal, which if we keep eating will actually become indigestion eventually. A favourite ice cream or whatever. So if there was anything inherently really pleasurable about those things that we go for, and sensual pleasure, then the more we have, the better we feel. But in fact, the more we have, usually the worse we feel. So that's like the suffering of change. It feels good at first, and then it actually changes from pleasure to pain. Okay? And even the Dalai Lama and Lama Zopa even gave the example of seeing the best friend you've had, and you haven't seen them for years, and you have a fantastic catch-up. Beautiful meal. Maybe they stay for a few days, but eventually, if they stay too long, you're actually wishing that person leaves, and it can actually turn to suffering. So we've all had these encounters. So that's the more subtle one. And then the last one is the fact that we are in what they call cyclic existence. We're actually, we're born into a human body this time, which is fantastic because of good karma in the past. But the karmic seeds that we have on our mind screen could at any moment give us a sudden change of circumstances. We could suddenly get ill. If we die, we could not have a human rebirth. We could end up in the body of a rat or an animal or a hell being, beings that are we can't actually see, but in a much more difficult position. So this is what we call sort of uncontrolled or conditional suffering, or all-pervasive. The fact that we're not liberated beings, means that we're going to encounter difficult times. So that actually explains why we have the second type of suffering and the first, because we're in this conditional existence. So that actually brings us to tonight's really topic. What is it that is actually causing all this suffering? The causes of the suffering. And so this is called the second noble truth. And sometimes different teachers use different terminology. But the Dalai Lama's teachings on the book that I mentioned in the reading list, Samsara and Nirvana, he uses the two terms mental afflictions and karma. So Rabina doesn't use mental afflictions. She calls it delusions, I think, usually. She says afflictions we don't use that term very often in English. Lama Zopa calls them disturbing thoughts, which I think is a very exact translation of the Sanskrit he explained. Disturbing thoughts. So these are things that happen in our minds that upset our peaceful state of mind. It could be anger, it could be attachment, jealousy, and so on. So these two things that are happening, mental afflictions. The second one is karma, which are the seeds that are planted on the mind stream from our previous actions of body, speech, and mind. Things that everything we do, say, or think is actually going to leave imprints on the mind stream. And positive actions like love and compassion, patience, equanimity, those activities and actions are going to leave positive imprints, which will have positive effects in the future. But negative actions, killing, attachment, so on, stealing, will have negative imprints that will produce negative results later, unless we purify. We can purify if we know how to purify. So these two things, one is karma is the result of our mental affliction, and mental afflictions are the things that are coming up all the time. It's kind of a vicious circle in a way, because if we're habituated to, say, anger, our mind is going to be more easily attuned, will more easily go into that state, and it's going to actually cause negative karmic imprints on the mind, and it will also have a tendency to repeat the habit. So this double sort of whammy, the two origins of suffering, are what causes all our problems. And of those mental afflictions, we'll have a look at them in a minute. The main one is ignorance. The three big ones are ignorance, anger, and attachment. The three big ones. So just a bit more about the idea of true causes. This is basically coming from a summary of what His Holiness said. So he says this. What I've just said, that the mental afflictions or the delusions will leave imprints on the mind, and that will cause more mental afflictions. The karma will cause us to want to have a tendency to do the actions again, and so we go around, and this prevents us. This is what's called cyclic existence, and this prevents us from attaining Nirvana, which is peace, ultimate peace, the awakened state. So next week, I'm hoping to get to teach the Wheel of Life, which is the 12 links of dependent origination. It's a beautiful set of teachings that actually explains how cyclic existence works very graphically. Cyclic existence, the Wheel of Life, 12 links. So we'll come to that next week. That goes into more detail about how cyclic existence works. So His Holiness says, beware when you're studying the causes, particularly our mental states, which are, there's a lot of negative thoughts going there. The more we do meditation, the more it seems that they're actually negative thoughts. There seems to be far more thoughts when we do sitting meditation than there were before we were sitting. That's because we're looking at the traffic passing. Instead of being caught up in the traffic jam, we're actually stepping back and seeing what's happening, and that can be quite frightening when you realise all this, what Lama Zempa used to call garbage thoughts or hallucinations. So His Holiness said, okay, we're going to talk about afflictions or delusions quite a lot, but he said, don't sort of take the attitude that we're terrible people, we've got so many negative thoughts, and go into self-criticism. He says that's the wrong attitude. Okay, so the idea of looking at mental affliction is actually to learn the problem, learn what we've got going on in the mind, and the same part of it is also learning what the remedies are. So use our knowledge to free ourselves, and this knowledge of these, what he says are the 6 main mental afflictions. So the different ways, if you read the different texts, even if you read some of the transcript of Venerable Fedor, they tend to sometimes present the mental afflictions in different ways. There could be 3 main afflictions, there could be 6. Some of them have different lists. So I decided to just use the list that His Holiness is using, which is the 6 root afflictions, they're called, the main ones. He seems to be presenting it in the most simple way. So there's many subcategories. I think there's 20 or 30 subcategories of each affliction, which I think Fedor goes into very well in his very detailed transcript. So if you want to go in more detail, he'll present all that, but we'll just stick to the 6 main afflictions. So another good analogy, His Holiness says, is that these afflictions or delusions are actually like thieves in the house that have been in the house, but we actually thought they were friends. So we didn't actually take much notice of them. And they've been stealing our happiness, he says. And when we can actually identify who they are and what they're doing, we can actually evict them, kick them out of the house and lock the door. Okay, so this is the great joy of these teachings, is that there are solutions to all these. They're actually not just solutions temporarily, but it's a complete path to end all the afflictions to liberation. There is such a thing, believe it or not. And so this is the incredible depth and profundity of the Buddhist teachings, is that they're actually presenting a complete end to all suffering. So the other thing to remember is all these afflictions, like everything, all phenomena, external into, are empty of inherent existence. There's nothing solid in them. They have no intrinsic reality. So they're transient like bubbles and have no essence. And he says anger, for example, is not an inherent part of us. It's not who we are. It's these afflictions, then, like, the common analogy is that they're clouds in the sky, and this sky is our Buddha nature behind, which is unstained or untouched by these afflictions, which are clouds passing and can be actually eliminated. So he says there are 2 sides to the afflictions. There are source of misery, and they also lack an essence and can be eradicated. It can be cleaned out. Okay, so then, looking at the 6 types, please ask questions as we go on, don't hesitate. Or write something in live chat if you've got something there. So the 6 the first 3 are attachment, sometimes called desire, anger. It's sometimes just called aversion, and ignorance, which is said to be the actual ultimate cause of all the others. Ignorance, attachment, and aversion. Attachment. I think His Holiness tends to use aversion more than anger. Anyway, it's always different words for different translations. So they're the 3 big ones, and then pride, deluded doubt, and afflictive views. So they're all explained very well in this Second Noble Truth. And they're all called root afflictions, but the ultimate cause of all of them is ignorance, lack of understanding on the way things exist. So remember, this is, just going back to the first class, I think this is why His Holiness gave a special mention of this idea that whoever this person is that's having all the suffering, keep in mind that there's no self-existent solid entity there called me. It's a imputed I. There is an I, but it's not existing in a solid, concrete way. So by keeping this in mind also helps to understand how these delusions or afflictions can be eliminated. There's nothing for them to hold on to. So, so the attachment, the more formal definition, what is attachment? It's the mind, it's in the mind, projecting some good qualities or perfect qualities onto an object, a person or a place, a thing, a person or a place, exaggerating the qualities or putting qualities onto that object that aren't there, inventing qualities or exaggerating qualities. So the mind sees only good qualities, and that's definitely not the case. So it exaggerates and falsifies. So it could be an idea, and probably, for instance, I thought people, with the coronavirus, we've got these people who think that the actual science is not correct. What the doctor's saying is a way to minimize contagion. They have an idea that contradicts that, and it's not based on reality. Okay, so, and they're so, not only that, but they hang on to that, and they, no matter how much evidence is placed in front of them, they won't change their minds. So this is attachment to an idea. It could be a fanatical sort of idea. It could be extreme, religious views, extremism. So this produces discontent and disturbance in the mind. Covetousness. So he's now mentioning sort of subcategories of attachment, which you can see pretty obvious. So covetousness. So envying what somebody else has, which could be new car, beautiful new house, new partner. So basically, you want what they've got. Okay? So attachment is feelings, lack of not having and wanting. Also miserliness, holding on to what wealth you have, because you're attached, you don't want to let it go. Haughtiness, holding on to your feeling of superiority. And restlessness, whatever you have, you always want more, it's never enough. So these are subsets, subcategories, different ways attachment can manifest. But His Holiness points out there's actually another quality that's similar called aspiration, aspiring, which can be positive. So things like aspiring to succeed in our practice, for instance, the first level of practice is wanting a good rebirth so that we can continue our practice in the next life as a human. That's a level of spiritual intent. The next level is not just to want positive human rebirth, but also want liberation so that we don't have to be reborn again. And then another more advanced one is full awakening, which is the Mahayana idea of full Buddhahood, which is motivated by compassion for all beings, wanting to be liberation so that we can help others become liberated. So he says these sort of aspirations are good. So it's not attachment, but it's having a positive wish to progress in our spiritual life, in our minds, a development of the mind. So the word craving, he says, is a form of attachment. Lama Zopa explains that there's two things, craving and grasping, you often hear in the teaching, as types of attachment. Lama Zopa explains craving as seeing something in the window of the shop that you really like and you feel you must have. And grasping is actually taking out the wallet and going through the action of getting it. Okay, so it's a more advanced form of craving. So the attachment there, the craving, I want it, and then I'm going to get it. Grasping, craving and grasping. So he says even attachment may have some positive aspects. His Holiness always sees these wonderful different possibilities, even in negative, what's root affliction. So he says, being really fond of your beautiful image of Buddha on the altar, so that it actually inspires you to practice. So if we've got a nice place to meditate, an altar, it can actually draw us into wanting to do our session, do our regular practice. So he said this sort of attachment is actually going to help our practice, so a positive aspect. Whereas if we're attached to that Buddha because we know how expensive it was and how beautiful, and we're going to show all our friends, it's like a status symbol. So that would be not a positive aspect of being, of not a positive way to regard that image of the Buddha. There's different ways that we can look at something and like it without being attached. It's going to help our practice. That's positive. So, any questions on that, Josh? Probably we've all experienced it. All these things are very familiar. I know you can notice it. I can always think of examples. And sometimes, if you're going for a job and somebody else gets it, you feel that you might be much better than that other person. So that means that there's some sort of envy or jealousy or whatever. And that can actually affect your attitude to that person. And if you look at it, it's basically me. It's about myself. About we didn't get it. Not the teaching would say rejoice in the fact that that person's got what you want. That's going to help our mind and will help our relationship with that other person. Anger. So this is said to be, while attachment is said to be quite subtle and can be very slow to arise and slow to get rid of, like trying to get oil out of a dirty rag, can take a lot of cleaning. Anger tends to be like a fire, very quick to arise and can actually die down very quickly. It can be quick, like a bushfire. So basically the formal definition is projecting undesirable qualities onto an object, person, or situation, and either loading them up with exaggerated negative quality or just putting negative qualities that don't even exist there. So you see, it's just different to attachment where we want that. This one, we're pushing it away. It's got qualities we don't like. So so this, if we do it with people, if we're feeling this towards people, we can see them as an enemy. We can hold a grudge. We can maybe want revenge. And it could arise from that person harming themselves, either physically or saying something bad about, maligning us, about us. Or it could be what they do to our close friends or relatives. Or it could be what they do to one's enemies. They could be helping one enemy. So it could be done something they did to us, our close friends or family, or something with the enemies. So we could be completely, have a very much, because it's a mental thing, there's no anger inherently in the person that we're angry with. It's not actually, it's the cause of our anger. There's no sort of anger on their side. Even though they may be feeling, but it's not intrinsic. So it could be a computer. That's the one that came to mind when I was thinking of anger with a thing, some sort of machine that doesn't work when one wants it to. Could be a situation, you're in the queue waiting to be served and nothing, everything breaks down. The whole situation is actually causing anger. Even irritation and annoyance is said to be subcategory of anger. So it doesn't have to be the bushfire. It could be just a smoldering thing that is still disturbing our minds. So that brings to the next point. These are subcategories: irritation, annoyance, frustration, hatred, rebelliousness, belligerence, resentment, vengeance, spite, cruelty, violence, and jealousy. Or the nasty ones. So these are some of the subcategories that come under anger. So as his Holiness says, it's a mental state, and it can be just as much not manifested as manifested. So he says, even if you don't express it, which is better than actually usually expressing it, but the mental state of anger, where you refuse to talk to the person who you might be very angry with, or you just ignore them, that is still anger in action. Okay? It's like it's passive anger. He points out that the mind is still in a state of anger. So,
You also said the other day, I listened to you say something, saying a little bit of anger could be a catalyst for something good.
right.
Like getting angry at the injustice or something.
Yeah. So actually,
a motivator, I think, and then he said, but I don't think he made me just hold on to it. It's just, I can't remember the rest of it.
social injustice, that's the way I've actually heard various teachers say that could be what might be wrath rather than anger.
Oh, okay.
That how dare that person be subject to such anger or torture and so on. But his Holiness said, I think I'll make the point a bit later, that it's a fine point. That could be just concern for the other person, wanting them not to be harmed.
Yeah.
But if we take it too far and we actually want to harm the harmer, then we've gone sort of too far, and we're into negative type of social injustice anger. Yeah. So it's a bit.
Which we see a lot of, actually.
You do see a lot of social injustice anger,
Yeah.
and they want to punish that person who's the propagator of the anger. So his Holiness would say, well, that's not good for the mind. Okay, you actually you're still in the anger side. If you're 100% concerned with alleviating the person's suffering, that's fine. He wouldn't call that anger. I'll just see if I've got the point. There's a point in there, might find it later. Yeah, so it is.
Somebody else being hurt,
Mm. I mean, there's probably the most contemporary example is the Me Too sort of movement, where some have been obviously harmed, and he says this could. If you just have a look at page. On the spot here. Okay, the bottom of page 4. Some emotions may arise from external factors. Abuse, combat, trauma, poverty, prejudice, oppression. Okay, so this is... so he's talking basically about those 6 root afflictions. But if we attribute problems only to external causes, we can't undo our past experiences. So if we're just fixated on the person who did the harming to us, the abuse, could it be physical, sexual, whatever, then we're not going to actually move to the solution, because basically we're forgetting that there is an element of the mind involved where we can actually approach it differently. Okay. So, although that doesn't mean these people shouldn't go through the normal justice system. I'm sure His Holiness wouldn't say that. But basically, the solution with the person who's suffering from it is very much in their mind, rather than even if that person goes to jail forever, that person can still have the problem in mind. So let's have a look. A fear often comes from anger, because we fear what we're going to lose, or that the problem could get worse, or there may not even be any problem, but we just fear it could happen. Okay, what could go wrong? So the third one is ignorance. So this is sometimes called confusion in some translation. I think Rabin likes the word confusion, because it doesn't sound quite... sometimes in our Western terminology of ignorance can mean, not knowing something, not having been to school, can't read and write and so on. Not really that meaning here. confusion. So can be not seeing things as they are, lack of clarity on the nature of things, and particularly not seeing things as they are lacking inherent existence. Okay, so this is something that, unless we come across Buddhism, we probably never even. I never heard of emptiness. This whole idea that there is no intrinsic reality, except just the little bit of physics idea. The more they looked at the building blocks of matter, the more they can't find any particles that can't be that are partless. Okay, so no particles, and this is consistent with quantum physics. Today, His Holiness mentioned it in his teaching. If you're lucky enough to watch it it's on YouTube. He did mention the fact that physics, quantum physics, contemporary physics, actually is a way of affirming the emptiness of objects. Okay, so I found this really reassuring. I could actually relate it to something that was not just Buddhism. And so it extends not just to external objects, but this sort of ignorance is the worst type. The one that does the most harm is assuming that there's this concrete me here that is more than just the conglomerate or the aggregates, they call it, of bits of body and the thoughts. It's more than that. There's something me behind all that, which is the self that I have of bits of body and the thoughts. It's more than that. There's something me behind all that, which is the self that I have to hold on to, protect, and can distinguish from you or others. So the beginning of the problem is to hold on to the sense of self, which we all have. And His Holiness points out that even babies and animals have it. It's innate, something we're born with. And it's something that's not going to be easily broken down. It's something that's going to take time. So, but actually, it's the root of samsara, called the root of. It's one of it's the root of samsara, called the root of. It's one of it's the beginning of all the problems. Self-grasping ignorance. Ignorance is one of the four distorted perceptions. Okay. So we'll see that next week when we look at the 12 links, it's the beginning of our circling in cyclic resistance. This conception of internal reality and external reality. So we'll come back to that one. The next one, pride, arrogance. So formal definition, an inflated sense of self-importance. And he says, His Holiness says that this is quite a big obstacle to learning. If you think you've actually got big knowledge and you know everything, it's very difficult to learn anything new and have an open mind. It's kind of closed-mindedness. It's actually called closed-mindedness sometimes. So he says, these are the type, he gives some interesting variations on arrogant. I'm better because I've got more wealth, I've got more looks, more knowledge, more social standing, more athletic ability, I'm more famous, etc. Maybe not all of those, but you can sort of, that's one grounds of feeling superior. The other one, he says, the conceit of I am. So this is based on grasping of this, that because I am, I exist, then I'm very important. Okay, I'm from first. So of course I'm here, I exist. But this is this delusion that there is a concrete sense of self, not realising the emptiness of self. So that's what probably we all have in a very subtle way. And then the other one's very interesting. He says, I'm a bit inferior when I've got someone that I know knows more than me, but I'm actually better than most other people. So, and he gives this quite shocking example. I am the disciple of a truly great spiritual master. Okay? So the spiritual master is obviously greater than me, but because I'm a disciple, I must be really important. So it's this pride. Okay? I'd never even thought of that as an example. It's interesting. might have thought that. I remember when I went, I actually did, lucky enough to have a very brief audience with His Holiness the Dalai Lama, and we did, as a group, we did the Bodhisattva retreat. And when I came back and told some of my friends, because they didn't know much about Buddhism, but I said, I met the Dalai Lama. Oh, wow, you actually met the Dalai Lama. There's a little bit of that. Me, yes, I'm very important. You can relate to that, a bit of that. Pride by association. Mind you, I wouldn't have missed the opportunity. Fantastic. Just have to watch the mind, what's happening to the mind. So he says the other thing to not confuse pride with is self-confidence. And His Holiness and many other teachers who are teaching Westerners, Tibetans teaching Westerners, make a strong point of pointing out the importance of having good self-confidence. And this is different from pride. So self-confidence is having an assurance that says that we can achieve our goals. Okay? Like we feel competent to do good. And not just do good, but he said even in Monday world, in your career and so on, you need a sense of being able to achieve what you want. And so it's helpful in all senses, but particularly in spiritual world, spiritual development. Okay, so that's I think particularly good for Westerners, because he does always point out that Westerners, more than Tibetans, have a much less strong sense of self-worth. They're more inclined to criticise the self and to have a lower sense of self-esteem. So he says this idea of self-confidence can often need to be built up. I think I wasn't naturally born with self-confidence, but the teachings I think have certainly increased my belief in how important it is. So I'm working on it. So that's that one. Deluded doubt. Just looking at the time, it's already 5 to 8. It's okay, we'll try and finish them. So the definition, it's a mental factor. So mental factor just means something that happens in the mind, an activity of the mind that's indecisive and wavers towards an incorrect conclusion concerning spiritual topics, such as the ultimate nature of phenomena, the four truths, the three jewels, and karma. Okay, so this is mind that doubt is good at the beginning when we start our study. We heard all this business about Buddhism and past lives. We need to work through and definitely not rely on something just because somebody said it. Remember, the Buddha said, test yourself, test to see whether the gold is real gold. And we use our intellect, our reasoning, our human brain to reason through things. And the Buddhist teachings will stand up to reasoning. Otherwise, His Holiness is saying this, particularly Mahayana Buddhism, because they stress the importance of using reasoning and not just relying on faith. His Holiness says that again and again. You can't just rely on faith, but your own internal reasoning. So, but this doubt is if you've come to a good conclusion and then you still keep doubting. You've got good, solid ground, but then your mind keeps going back and are the four truths. Is karma really true? Are there such thing as the three jewels? So it's just constantly undermining our progress, and we can't move forward. He says it's not curiosity is different, because curiosity is wanting to know more, and it's also there's a positive doubt, which is what I also mentioned, wanting to check up more and find what the reasons are. What are the reasons that Buddha's put forward for past lives? Many, strong teaching on how past lives can be shown to be more likely than not. So, afflictive views. So this is kind of overlapping with ignorance. So it can be, like we've just said, the view that there's no such thing as past life. When we die, everything stops, so we can live whatever sort of life we want. No such thing as karma. Eat, drink, and be merry. Doesn't matter what you do. There's not going to be any consequences. So these kind of, he lists 5 there, which maybe I won't go through one by one, but some of the things, two extreme views that are pointed out when we're thinking about emptiness, lack of inherent existence. First thing is that there's nothing, but lack of inherent existence means nothing exists. That's called nihilism. That's wrong. And the other thing is that everything exists. It's all existing from its own side, and that's called eternalism, including me. The self will keep lasting forever, just a bit like the sense of a soul that never dies. So that's eternalism. So they're 2 extreme views that are incorrect. Correct views in the middle. The self exists, but by imputation, by labelling. Okay, so that also covers view of personal identity. I put more notes there because he actually gives quite a long explanation of that very first view, being that he says is the main wrong view, that what he calls the root of psychic existence. And this is where he points out this view of personal identity is innate in animals, babies, all beings, until we start to tackle it with various types of antidotes and teachings and purifications. And from I, mine arises. So we've got, His Holiness today pointed out the thinking of this sort of thinking is that because I exist, there's others out there, is what causes a lack of globalization, lack of good relationships with other nations, because from this feeling of me is my country, okay, and not your country. Okay, so we set up barriers. So this of I and mine is what stops this sense of togetherness, of humanity, equanimity of others. From that comes nationalism. What I know is more important, is better than me. What is not known, the fear of the unknown. Just want to make sure we've got time to do our brief. We'll do at least 15 minutes meditation on the 3 types of suffering. So just looking at, might just have a drink of water. If anybody's got any questions, think about them. Think of a question, comment. So he said, he sort of points out that remember, all these teachings are specifically for Westerners. These books that he's written on Lamrim. So these terms that we often hear from when we're talking about mental illnesses in the West: fear, insecurity, anxiety. And he says, there was nothing specifically using those words in the Buddha's Four Noble Truths teaching, but he points out these things probably come under attachment, or they definitely do come under attachment. So fear of being separated from those we love, and of going to situations that we don't know about, that we feel afraid of. Anxiety can arise over things that, particularly now, with so many strange things happening with the pandemic, fear that we could lose our jobs, our health, take for granted, or things such as relationships, things that seem to be happening around us but may never happen to us. So that basically, again, he says, comes as a form of attachment, holding on, wanting things not to change, holding on to our comfort zone. So some things actually are not just in our minds. There are particularly topical things he mentions, such as abuse, physical and sexual abuse, combat trauma. So another thing that's often in the news among soldiers that come back from overseas. So there's definitely some external part cause that trauma in that person's mind during their combat. But we need to, he says, if we just see it as something external, we can't actually tackle the problem, because it's how that person processes what's happening externally in their mind. Poverty, prejudice, oppression. So, so if it is, he just makes a very simple statement: if there are external factors, and we don't look beyond external factors, then healing is going to be, any mental healing, moving on is going to be difficult, because we're holding on to past experience we cannot be changed. All those external factors happen, but we can't actually undo them. So it's a matter of looking at the path, the true cessations of these mental. Here it's either attachment, it's anxiety, trauma, maybe based on attachment, could be based on other of the 6 root afflictions. So he says, to help us to get away from this idea that the external causes are unlinked, the word hardwired is often used in, that something, hardwired is a very physical thing. It's like you've got something in your brain that can't be undone, which is it's actually contrary to brain plasticity, even to medical science. Like the word hardwired doesn't fit with the idea that the brain can be changed, which has only been accepted in the last 10 or 20 years. So it's also contrary to the Buddhist approach. Says that the coarse levels of minds are very much dependent on our experience, but he says the subtlest minds, the deeper level, are not necessarily bound by physical limitations of our body and brain. So this fits in with, I just think, with Alan Wallace's teachings when he's teaching the importance of shamatha and calming the mind, to actually get down, he calls it the substrata, which is like the Bhavanga, I think he calls it as well. So by calming the coarse levels of the mind, the turbulent waves on the top, we can actually feel this sense of peace and tranquility and things that are unmoved in our deepest level. You can get a taste of that sometimes when you do a good session of mindfulness meditation, shamatha meditation. So he made that point quite when he did the retreat in Balmain just a year or so ago. So the other way, there are counterforces as well. So the shamatha meditation is definitely a way of a countermeasure, but there are many others as well. And so we probably won't have much time to look at. We might finish this off next week, but so first, just looking at the counterforces, a bit there on page 5 and 6. So he says, first of all, use mindfulness to check what's happening in our mind. Say, it gives the idea of anger. So he says, if there's a sense that your heart's racing, blood pressure's probably up, and your face is red and probably ugly, he says it's probably anger going on there. So we can maybe not see it in ourselves because we're so tied up with it. If we are in a state of anger, very hard to see what's happening, but we can see it in other people. The red face particularly, and usually the person, even if they're good looking, can look quite ugly. So if we're completely distracted by thinking of something very beautiful, beautiful clothing or work of art we must buy, then probably attachments operating. Just all these examples. If you feel very uneasy when somebody's succeeding and we're not, probably jealousy. If we just have want to laze around and do nothing. Probably because it's the laziness of procrastination, definitely one of my faults. And if you put yourself down, laziness of discouragement. So that very interesting for the sense of that I can't actually make much problem. I'm a really bad meditator. What's the use? The laziness of discouragement. So we're actually putting our abilities down because of that laziness. Why are we going to the refrigerator when we're hungry? And then he even raised the question, why are we checking social media continually? What's actually wrong? What's going on? No, particularly during the lockdown, I was definitely checking my messages more. And it's what's happening. So he's not giving us an answer. He just says, just use mindfulness to see what's happening. Probably attachment to distraction. It's nothing to keep us. We're not at work. There's not a busy scene going on.
Is it soothing?
What could it?
Could it be soothing for some people?
It can be soothing, but only for temporary. Because if you find yourself, you've soothed, and then 3 minutes later you're looking at it again, it's a problem, isn't it? You're not soothed. You're addicted.
I do it with Twitter. I'd like to keep up with things, and then I get so upset with what I'm reading and have to turn it off because it's quite volatile.
Yeah. You were hoping to find something that would soothe, but it's very often it doesn't. It can make you more unpeaceful, stirred up.
Yeah.
Okay, so basically he's saying this is where we need to sort of look at what's happening. And he says particularly at the time when you're doing your practice, like at home, he said you can't actually start doing observation of anger and countermeasures if you're actually truly angry, because the emotions are so strong. But if you can actually do some practice about the person, say, or situation that makes you angry, when you're home quietly, you've done some breath meditation, and you do some analytical okay, using a very well-guided meditation, bring the person who creates these unsettled thoughts in front of you, okay? Think of that person as a human being, suffering. So you use those techniques to see that person that is loved by somebody. Somebody sees that only good in that person. So you start to do that, and then by doing that fairly regularly at home, when that person's in front of you actually in the war zone, the practice you did at home can make it much easier to step back, because you've used some familiarity with that practice. So that's basically what it means when he says, particularly when you're out of the situation. Same with maybe attachment. When you start to think of the other side of that very attractive person, he gives an example of being attracted to attractive people is to think of the person as all the different parts, the organs, the waste material, everything of bones, everything that's there. So this is to see the unclean side of the body beyond the skin. But then interestingly, he says that's very useful, but don't go too far, because if you keep using that too much, whenever you see another human being, you feel repulsion. Okay, it can be used too much. So he says, as with all of all our practices, we need to take a middle road, middle path, avoid extremism. Okay, so let's 8:10. So let's maybe do some practice, and we can just maybe look at this meditation on suffering. It's fairly straightforward. It's just actually giving time to our mind to take on board each of these different types of suffering. Okay, so just get comfortable, lying, sitting, on chair, on the floor, whatever's good, and we'll just do a meditation on 3 types of suffering. few minutes to just calm the mind, settling the body, getting comfortable in the body, and watching the breath, moving to the breath, settling the breath in its natural state. So I begin our meditation on suffering. First type of suffering called suffering of suffering, the most obvious one. First of all, physical types of suffering that all of us experience by just being alive, having a human body. Things like illnesses, you'll experience sickness, colds, aches and pains, accidents, cuts and bruises, injuries, sporting injuries. Suffering of suffering also covers aging, even if we're young, we can see the suffering of suffering, like visiting older relatives, nursing homes in particular. Even the strongest and healthiest body will age as we get older. The truth of sickness as we get older, and then the ultimate detachment of the body at the time of death, letting go of the body. You can also remember Buddha's life story. He was sheltered from all types of suffering until he left the palace. Just in one short walk, saw an old person, a sick person, and a dying person, old age, sickness and death. Also includes mental sickness and mental disease, anxiety, depression, stress, anxiety. We all experience these. We don't want them, but we from time to time experience both physical and mental suffering. Encountering what we dislike, not getting what we like. Many of these mental sufferings arise from the 6 root afflictions, seeing things in the wrong way, hallucinations, illusions. Next, the second type of suffering, suffering of change. More subtle. Suffering of change includes experience that we normally think of as pleasure. sensual experiences, beautiful food, beautiful music, sound, sensual experiences, beauty, how long do these experiences last that we think of as pleasurable? And how long can we experience them before they turn to pain, suffering? Too much good music, we get sick of that chewing. Too much good food, digestion. Also included in suffering of change is painkillers. We have a toothache, we take the painkiller and we feel pleasure because the pain's gone. We feel better than before we had the pain. But it's only in comparison with the painful experience. It's not pleasure in itself. So part of it is clinging to the pleasurable experiences, not just experiencing them. So part of it is clinging to the pleasurable experiences, not just experiencing them and letting them go, but wanting more sense of dissatisfaction, but wanting more sense of dissatisfaction at the end of the experience. Lack of understanding of change and impermanence. And have this experience that we're let down by the pleasurable experiences we're having. That we're let down by the pleasurable experiences we're having. Much of consumerism based on this delusion that these experiences will provide lasting pleasure. And they don't. Or these experiences will come to an end, beautiful party, beautiful picture, beautiful house, beautiful car, brand new appliance, all of them will permanent and will age. Experience will end every day. The last time of suffering, the most subtle, most difficult to detect, suffering of change or detect, suffering of change or all pervasive, conditional suffering. This is about our predicament, simply being alive. Our existence is other-powered by the 6 root afflictions and karma. While we're under control of karma and delusions, there can be no lasting joy or happiness. Even if we're having only a neutral experience, we're still conditioned by causes of suffering, ignorance, anger, attachment. Because we're in samsara, cyclic existence, we're not liberated. As long as we're in samsara, we're in cyclic existence, suffering will happen. Suffering of condition. So, this is just the first noble truth, acknowledging that there is suffering in our existence for all these different types. First noble truth leads to the second, that all these sufferings have causes. Leads to the fact that the causes themselves can be ended, can be dealt with through cessations of causes, purification, practicing the teaching, the path, the fourth noble truth, will help us tackle the root of all these sufferings, bring sufferings to an end forever. Just quoting to conclude from the Guru Puja, about suffering, violently tossed amid waves of delusions and karma, plagued by hordes of watery denizens, the three kinds of suffering. We seek your blessings to the Buddha to develop an intense longing to be free from this monstrous ocean of boundless and vicious existence. So we can dedicate any positive merit from this practice, that is tonight's teaching, or the positive actions we've done in past, present, future. We can dedicate, using Lama's open special dedication, particularly for the coronavirus, however many sick sentient beings there are, may they quickly be freed from all sickness. May all the sickness without exception of all transmigrating beings never occur again. Due to the merits of the three times collected by me, or numberless Buddhas, or the numberless sentient being, may all wars or sickness, famine, torture, poverty, economic problems in the world, all dangers of earth, water, fire and wind be pacified immediately. May perfect peace and happiness prevail in everyone's hearts and lives. May the Buddha Dharma last for a long time. May sentient beings in this world meet the Buddha Dharma and achieve enlightenment as quickly as possible. Let it go into that. Okay, so that's it for tonight. Thanks so much for being here in the room and also out there. Hope to see you next week at the same time. Have a great week. Stay healthy. Thank you. Dream.